It's okay. I got booted as well.
Yeah.
Something went funky.
Shall we pick up? What did you hear last? Now this
Well,
is a quick.
give us a little bit actually. 'Cause I think people actually unfortunately have to find their way back in. Um, they'll be coming in just a second. Okay, so we're back. We're back on back on track. Um,
Sorry, everybody.
okay, people are coming back in, so you can probably pick up where you left off. So we
Okay,
were.
so guitar tops are basically potato chips that are very thin and light, but have bracing to not only take the tension of the strings and prevent them from collapsing, but also to manage the stiffness in different directions. That's why braces don't just go vertically. We're trying to manage movements of the top in many different directions. All right, so now let's talk about a double top. A double top guitar, this type of soundboard was in the modern theoretical way of thinking that a lighter top that could withstand the same kind of string tension could be more powerful, could be more responsive, could be a lot of things. And in the 90s, they were pioneered by two builders in Germany. And the idea was, if you think about cardboard, cardboard, corrugated cardboard is pretty stiff for its weight, right? And it's composed of three layers. It's composed of an outer veneer, paper, and an inner veneer, and then it's got a core that has different kinds of structure on the inside. But if you glue them together, they're way stronger than the individual elements and really, really light for what they are. That's essentially what you're building with a double top guitar, where you would produce very thin veneers of soundboard material, the same soundboard material that I would use for a solid top. And using that drum sander, I can get this piece to be 0.6 millimeters or 0.7 millimeters thin. And you would think, well, this would be very flimsy in any kind of construction. But what builders did in Germany was they started to use things like balsa wood, like chopsticks, inside two veneer sandwiches of veneer. Now, people in radio controlled planes will know that there's this material called Nomex, which is it's a synthetic honeycomb, and they would put that between two veneers to create essentially cardboard or some kind of wood. So the double top nomenclature came from two tops, but it's actually three layers, or maybe more correctly called a sandwich top. All right, so immediately people knew that, hey, I can use two pieces of spruce, two pieces of cedar, or I can mix them. Okay, so now going to is a Jeff's question. If you have a bridge that sits on the outside of a sandwich of cedar and spruce, or spruce on the outside, cedar on the inside, would it have a difference in sound if you flipped it? So I happen to have a double top sandwich that has, it's like a magic trick. Okay, you see spruce on the outside, you see cedar on the inside. Which way do I orient the bridge? Well, the observation, the overwhelming observation that double top builders have is that in most cases, if you use Nomex in the middle of this, it will manifest itself as a spruce sounding and responding guitar in all the kind of stereotypes that we think about spruce and cedar if I put the bridge to the spruce on the outside. Now, theoretically, I think that's the case because the Nomex is not resonant. It's papery thin, and it does not conduct some of the very initial impulses of sound production. So it will sound like a spruce guitar if I put the bridge on this side, and it will sound kind of like a cedar guitar if I put the bridge on the cedar side. Okay, the type of double tops that I make these days doesn't have Nomex, although I still build some with Nomex. For about the last 6 years, I've worked with a robotics expert to cut these cores directly into the wood with a CNC robot. And it cuts the hole, but it doesn't blow through all the way, so that I have cedar, essentially a cedar veneer on one side. So if I thin that to the appropriate, what's going to become the appropriate thickness, and I take another veneer of the spruce, and I glue them together in a vacuum bag, which is like a big rubber seal-a-meal that has a vacuum pump that exhausts all the air out of it and compresses them with the glue on there. I create that double top sandwich. What I found with wood being in the middle is it really is, it can fool people. They don't know what it is if I don't tell them what it is. They think, is it spruce? Is it cedar? That's if you were closing your eyes, an experienced guitarist would recognize some of the attributes of fast, boisterous attack with cedar, perhaps, and maybe the control, the clarity, the like very penetrating first string that you might associate with spruce. So Jeff, there's your pretty long-winded explanation of maybe 25 years of double top development that continues to develop as people find more and more ways to make a sandwich. There's talk of maybe foam cores being used. It's hard to know because you can't see in the middle, and unless the builder divulges what's in the middle, we really don't know. But people might think that it would be very fragile, but it's quite the opposite. They become very pliable because you start to lose cross-grain, the difference in the stiffness in the long grain with the grain or cross grain. So it's almost kind of rubbery, and they don't crack. If you puncture them, they don't propagate. They typically do not propagate the crack, at least in this honeycomb or in this hole situation with the holes in the middle, because the crack can't go past the next wall. So while there were initially fears about how double tops could fall apart, that just never came to be.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, for the people with questions, we unfortunately lost all those questions that were piling up in the other feed that we dropped out somehow. But Heidi did have a follow-up question asking, how many years has that robotic method been used? I mean, has it been? Are other people using this? Is it particular to you in a collaboration with an engineer?
I was not the first person to develop it. The first person I saw use it was Friedrich Luthier in Ohio. He is an engineer by training. And he, I think, individually drilled holes with a drill press. But very few people have used this. Many people follow the German style, which is the chopsticks. And if you see guitars such like Antonius Müller, played by Sharon Isbin, if you see this imprinting on her guitar's face, if the light glares on it, right, you'll see these sort of triangular chevrons going down. Those are the chopstick-like balsa wood slats that are in the core of that. So that's one style. But as far as using robotics, I might be one of the few, certainly in the US and maybe around the world. But it just made a lot of sense to me to use robotics to do it.
Staying on the theme of double tops, Matthew asked, can a double top be combined with lattice bracing, the two most significant developments in classical guitar making in the last 50 years?
Absolutely. Because once you have this panel, you can brace it any way that you want. You can use lattice. So the double top only says something about the plate, not the way that you brace it. And the reason why most builders used lattice brace guitars was Greg Smallman in the 80s in Australia, and then subsequent your guitar by Michael Sheridan has lattice bracing, and the whole concept of that is along the lines of trying to lighten the top. So there, the strategy is make a very thin top on the order of 1.4 millimeters thick or thin, but put loads of very light balsa wood bracing underneath. And theoretically, it's the plate of wood that is always going to have the highest amount of weight in it, no matter how much bracing you put on it, which is the reason why when we build buildings, we have a floor and we have a lot of beams underneath it. We could triple the thickness of our concrete floor, but it would practically collapse on itself because it would be so heavy. It's always better to put bracing on it. So yes, you could go another 9 miles and put lattice bracing, although for a double top, it already has a lot of stiffness built in. And the trick about building double tops is that most builders start building too stiff of a plate to begin with because it's inherently a strong system and you need to actually back off on the bracing. So yes, you could put a very light lattice integrated network of braces, but it will give you a different type of sound and it's a different approach. There are builders who do it though.
I feel bad. There's so many questions coming in. It's going to be impossible to answer them all. So I feel bad about asking a follow-up of my own, but I'm curious, has there been, so we've got Nomex, we've got balsa, carbon fiber. Are there any other materials that are new on the scene that have been experimented with?
Well, as far as substitutes to wood, at least in our lifetimes and probably the next lifetime, there will be plenty of spruce and cedar. So I don't think that it will be pushed out because of a lack of availability. It's hard. We always have this balance between what constitutes or is acceptable for classical guitar sound versus what would be the advantages for using other woods. I think for back and side woods, though, alternative woods, because the back and sides have a less of a role in the characteristic sound of a classical guitar, alternative woods that are either cheaper or more available than tropical hardwoods, which we know that rainforests or areas in warm climates are being deforested. So that has become a factor in moving from rosewoods, which are dark colored rosewoods, to maybe other more acceptable types of woods that have some of the same properties but don't sort of trigger our psychological senses that what we see often colors what we hear.
Sure, absolutely.
And as
Well,
players and builders, yeah, we have to be cognizant of that.
speaking of climate, this is my segue. There's been a number of questions about humidity. So one was directly about double tops versus solo tops. How do you humidify a double top the same way? And then also someone asked your thoughts on and advice on guitars in very dry and very humid environments. And then the third one on humidity was, that was the first one qualifying again. Do you recommend the end user of your double top guitar humidify the same as a solid top, roughly 50% humidity in the Northeast? So, yeah.
Okay, good. I think I got that. Okay, let's start backwards because the double top, yes, humidify in the same way. And this will get back to the front end of the question is what dictates how you should humidify your guitar is what happens here in our kitchen. The atmosphere that I am gluing two pieces of wood together, if I take two pieces of wood and they have different grain orientations and they have different expansion rates with respect to how much wood they absorb, that's fine until they're glued and fixed together. As soon as they're fixed, if they will not change size, and the forces will not change if the humidity doesn't change from the humidity that they were glued and fixed. As soon as they are taken out of this environment, and mine is between 45 and 50% relative humidity, right now I have a dehumidifier going. And I just changed over from a humidifier. So for North American winter to now getting wet in the Northeast, I have to dehumidify. But so in most cases, if you go to higher humidity, it's safe for guitars until it gets up to maybe like 80% relative humidity, in which case the pieces will expand so much that they'll want to pop. But if you go below the atmosphere, the humidity that they were glued at, now they shrink. And now usually the weakest link is the soundboard, and they contract at the grain lines, and that's why you usually see vertical cracks following grain lines. So that's why it's really important to always humidify, even when you're in doubt, humidify. Okay, so what was the next part of the question? Did we hit?
Well, it was sort of, I think, asking, is it the same for a double top versus
Yes.
other building construction types?
Great, yes. The answer is yes, because in my workshop, all the components were fixed and glued together at the same relative humidity. Just more parts, but yes, same as I would do for a solid top.
Great. I did see a couple of questions about string tension. Eric asked, I've heard that high tension strings can damage the soundboard over time. Is that true?
Generally, my experience is no, because the difference between medium tension and high tension for most brands is on the order of 10% or less. So it's just because you're going from medium tension to high tension, you're not doubling the tension, and therefore it's not going to deform the top as much as you might think. So I always, at least for my guitars, I know that I just let players decide based on their playing style, and I think that's kind of a fair way to go. I don't sweat over whether somebody wants to go to high tension or even extra high tension, but I know my guitars can take it. So generally, I think it's not a concern as much as people think. Now, as a player, you should be concerned for whatever advantage or disadvantage you think. Higher tension, you can lower your action with higher tension strings because they don't oscillate as much and less chance of hitting the frets. So you can lower that action. So there's no free lunch, though, because you can lower the action, but the stiffness that you feel in your right and left hand, well, you might, as a player, think that's good or that's a bad thing. It really depends on where you are. But a lower tension string will definitely feel softer on your left hand and certainly your right hand, but you'll have to have your action higher.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's some people with the perception that, I think you've already answered it to a certain degree, but Jeff is asking, is it safe to use high tension strings without a truss rod?
Okay, so a truss rod, he's asking about now how the neck bends. And we know from steel string guitars, you have a truss rod because the tension on steel strings is twice that of a nylon string guitar. So it will bow the neck. So if this is a neck, the tension of the string will put curvature into it and add an extra distance between the bottom of the string and the top of the fret, extra distance to push down. Some, what's called relief, or that curvature, is good because it mirrors kind of this parabolic oscillation of the string. And you can actually, if you have a small amount of that curvature that mirrors that, you can actually lower the action. But when it goes too far, and too far is like more than 0.5 millimeters of deviation from a straight line across the tops of the frets, then you're into a problem. Now, do you need a truss rod to correct it? A truss rod will, when you tighten it down, it pulls it back and straightens out the neck. On classical guitars, it may not be necessary if there's enough strength in the neck. So for hundreds of years, guitars have been made without truss rods, and recently some appear. But it really depends on what cut of wood, the quality of that cut of wood that the luthier chose to build the neck, the grain orientation, the stiffness, and whether that neck is going to bend. If it's going to bend, well, sure, it would have been great to have a truss rod. Kind of a midway to that would be to put carbon fiber rods in your neck. So here's a neck that underneath this fingerboard, the black, I have twin carbon fiber rods. Let's see. Can you see this? Yeah,
Oh
there you
yeah,
go.
absolutely. Huh.
Okay, so they run the length of the neck, and that resists any potential for too much curvature. Now, I sand in some curvature into the fingerboard, so that's already there, but it's so stiff that it's not going to move. So I don't need a truss rod. So the answer is it depends on a lot of factors that was dependent on what choices the builder made.
Interesting. Um, Drew asked, when finishing a guitar, how do you adjust for intonation considering the unique qualities of each instrument?
Okay, we shot a video for this in CGC, which talks all about the nitty-gritty of intonation. And Drew, you can take a look at that. But yes, intonation is a huge thing, and it comes down to where the ends are set. And we know the ends of the strings are set by the nut, the placement of the nut and the saddle, according to the scale length and the distances of your frets. Okay, so it is possible to, after you glue the bridge, which sets the saddle distance, if your guitar is playing sharp as we play up the neck, that means you need to add extra distance to the string length. And we do that by where we glue the bridge and place the saddle. But we can also do things of, if the saddle is, let's say, 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters thick, I can file away the front edge of the saddle at a 45-degree angle and set back the point where the string leaves the saddle by fractions of a millimeter. And I can adjust perfectly the intonation for that string. That's called compensation. So yes, it's possible. But for some guitars, if the bridge was glued in a place that I have no more saddle to facet back, or it was glued too close, there could be no hope for that guitar to ever be micro adjusted.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sorry, go
if you
ahead.
go to our video in CGC, one of the things we did in the videos was to point out what I call deal breakers. If you're considering a guitar, walk away. If you see this, if you try this diagnostic and that fails, walk away from buying that guitar.
There was a nice question a little earlier, which I thought was a nice, generous question, which was, where can someone play one of your instruments?
You can come to New Jersey. It's one of them. But I always tell people the best thing, it won't happen this year, but go to a GFA convention. It was supposed to happen in Indianapolis, and it's going to be online for free starting on the 20th of June. But every summer, I will be at a GFA convention, and I always have one guitar to purchase immediately, or at least try. And it should just be that just come and play not just my instruments, but all of my colleagues' instruments, which are just wonderful, wonderful instruments. You could try up to 30 to 40 different builders' guitars. So check where the GFA is going to be, and if we're on, I'll be there, and I'll see you there.
Yeah, and we've talked a couple of times about somehow getting you up to the summer school at CGC Summer School, so that might be an opportunity in the future as well. Once we're out of this. I don't want to. I'm really grateful for your time, and obviously people are seeing how wonderfully we are communicating all these answers. So I'm going to try and cherry pick one or two more
Okay.
questions. Um, well, here's a nice simple one. Brooke asked, "How is the rosette created?"
Oh, okay, Brooke. This is the only thing on a guitar that has no real function other than being purely decorative. Most things are built on a guitar for a reason. How do I do a rosette? Okay. Well, let me show you on my guitars. Put some light on it. Okay. I don't know if it's close enough, but these are all wood veneers that have been sliced and diced in different orientations to give two patterns, an inner helix, and it also has some wheat motif. So those are all gymnastics of orientation, sawing, gluing, and then reorienting and sawing to get different patterns. And then what I do is I will cut. You're actually on the material. The computer is on the material. I cut and I start inlaying tiles into this spruce material, which is sacrificial, and then I extract it. So each of those pleats was an individual tile that was hand glued and hand fitted in there with different lines of purfling. It's one of the beautiful artistic traditions of guitar building that even steel string guitars don't have that same kind of aesthetic, and it's very personal for an individual builder. But yeah, I wish I had time to show you the exact, but if you go to my website, you can see photos. There's actually a ton of building photos if you have the time during this pandemic to sift through all of those.
The penultimate question is, which is just a little short one, possibly, is do you have apprenticeships? Shannon asked if you have apprenticeships.
Unfortunately not, because, well, let's just take, for example, it takes about 180 hours of contact time for me to build a guitar. Then it would take quite a long time to teach somebody guitar building. I always felt that I could teach, have more success teaching on a more global scale if I write and I lecture on conceptual things, because getting past building a jewelry box is basic woodworking, but getting the sound and the feel and all of these geometric things of playability is really where higher level building is. So I can write about that. I can reach more people talking about those theoretical things. The hands-on stuff, easier to get nowadays. There are courses on that in schools of building. I can say that I did, for the first time, have a student for the last 2 years, Ramon Zayas, who has extraordinary repair skills and has been around fine guitars and had conceptually like the ability to use these concepts to build on a higher level. And he finished his in the last few months, and it was an incredible sounding guitar. So that was the one exception. It just takes too much time to have a student. And
Yeah,
my commute is from upstairs to downstairs. We're in the basement right now in the workshop, so I'm at all hours of time building.
right. And oh, my brain just stopped for a second. I had something to say, but anyway, I will go to the last question, um, which I think is quite a nice story behind it, or I was surprised when I found the answer to this question. But I think it was Chad who asked, "What's your go-to guitar?"
Okay, so I love traditional guitars. I love modern guitars. I have some idols of guitar building, those influences being Daniel Friedrich and John Gilbert, who was my mentor. But my go-to guitar is a guitar that I built for myself last year. It's this guitar, and it's just a wonderful guitar. It's a double top with that cedar core on the inside. It's Amazon rosewood on the back and sides. It's 644 millimeters scale, which is a slightly smaller than your standard 650. Very standard other type of size dimensions. It has an elevated fingerboard. And then the other thing that it has is which is typical of my guitars, you can adjust the action on the fly with a key, which changes the neck angle. It's an idea that goes back to the 1800s from Viennese guitars. But yeah, I love this guitar. It has power, but that power is not the thing. It's got a refinement of sound that I really love, but a huge tonal palette, big, expressive variability in sound if you coax it out of it. Yeah, I love this guitar.
I thought it was really interesting when you told me about this guitar. I think when I saw you last, you just recently built it for yourself. I think it was for a birthday present for yourself or something like that, was it? It was some
But
kind of gift. But I was surprised that you'd sort of on the order queue, you sort of notched one in for yourself. I mean, people might assume, oh, you're a guitar builder, you must have tons of guitars you've built for yourself, but it's not that way actually.
no, it's not. I have to get in line with everybody else, and it's just the way that I do things. If somebody places an order, they're going to know that they're on the spreadsheet, and their delivery date is going to be within 3 months, hopefully, of when I tell them, even though that might be 5 years out. But yes, I'm pretty rigid. And the way this all started was early on, I realized that I needed to build in time to do development, whether it was learning how to make elevated fingerboards or developing a double top, and that I would never experiment on a client's guitar. So if it's even going to be my guitar, I slot that time, and I'm not going to push clients one way or the other. That's just not nice.
Sure. Well, no. Anyway, I thought it was quite beautiful having to be patient to wait for one of your own constructions. Well, look, there's a lot of other questions coming in. As you can see, everyone watching, Gary is a wonderful communicator, and I would highly recommend maybe if you have a society or you're involved with a university, Gary does give lectures. That's correct? You've sort of
I
flown
do.
around the world. Yeah.
I'm happy to give workshops and lectures for all different levels. And if you go to my website, if you go to the, I think, resources for players and luthiers, it'll show all the topics of lectures and the lectures that I've done. You can also find articles there about how to wash your fingerboard, Simon, and things
Oh,
like
you're
that,
watching the introduction.
so that the
What,
police don't come and take you away.
what's your website address?
It's GarrettLeeGuitars.com.
Garrett Lee Guitars. Well, thank you so much, Gary. I really appreciate your time. I think everyone else is very appreciative. Thank you for everyone for asking questions. I know there's more questions than could be answered, but
Good questions by everybody. I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in, and thanks for the opportunity. We'll do it again some other time.
yeah, sounds good. All right, Gary. Well, I'm going to let you go, and then I'll say goodbye to the peeps, and I'll also figure out what we're going to do with the two-parter that we did today. I'm going to have to stitch it together and re-upload it or something like
Yeah,
that. But technology. But thank you so much, Gary, and
my pleasure.
I'll call you in a bit for our debrief.
Thank you.
All right, I'll see you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Well, thank you, everyone. Sorry we had that technical break in the middle. Technology. We've been doing pretty well. The technology gods have been kind to us uh, over the years, over the months. So yeah, I mean, John said, what a great guy. I want one of his guitars. I've played that guitar that he had, and it really is a very sophisticated one instrument. And one of the things that I personally admire very much about Gary's building is the workmanship, if that's the right word, the craftsmanship. Is just a very um, fine, refined build-up, attention to detail, consistent. So it's just a really very, very high level, and some really wonderful players who have been playing his guitars. So feel free, Gary obviously has these Garrett Lee guitars. com, and feel free to go and have a look at his website and check out his things, and maybe one day you get to play one of his guitars. I think it's, guitars have so much more than just the instrument themselves. They've got their life of the instrument, the people who played them, but the people who built them, and then the traditions that went into that. So I hope you enjoyed getting to see the person behind these instruments, and maybe one day you get to play them. So that would be really nice. So he said that he goes to the GFA convention, and I really would like to bring him to the CGC summer school one year. So maybe that might be an opportunity for people to see his guitars as well. So um, so thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for finding the live stream again, and for sticking with me. I'll see you next Tuesday. I don't know what's going to be the show next Tuesday, but it will be something interesting. I appreciate you all being here. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you soon. Bye, everyone.